Welcome to Climate and Cocktails. I am your host, David Gumbs, Director of RMI Islands Program. RMI is an organization that is working with Caribbean and countries and governments and companies to help transition away from fossil fuel to renewable energy sources. Today, my guest is Racquel Moses, a native Caribbean. She is born and raised in Trinidad, and I'm excited to have this conversation with her today. She's not only a friend, but she is someone who's a champion in the region for climate change. I'd like to ask you a little bit about yourself. Tell me a little about how you got into this space, and then we'll drill in a little more just about who Racquel Moses is and what gives her that energy to do all the excellent things that you do.
Well, I certainly try my best, and thank you so much, David, and hats off to RMI and the wonderful work that you're doing to unlock our energy independence in the region. Yeah, so I was head of Microsoft for Trinidad and Tobago, and I had a baby. And at Microsoft, we had this magnificent project using Internet of Things or IoT devices to check on carbon emissions from oil spills in the Gulf of Paria in Trinidad and Tobago. And it really got me quite interested in climate action and what was happening because, we understood the impact of a single oil spill or, on the biodiversity in the Gulf of Paria. So that was on my mind when I had this baby, and then my husband and I are talking about, okay, so how much money do we need to have when she's 18 to send her off to college? And the IPCC report came out, and it said, in 12 years, if we don't bend this curve, we are facing irreversible damage. And I said to my husband, why are we talking about things 18 years ago when in 12 years we could be staring down the barrel of an irreversible gun? And I said, when this baby starts sleeping through the night, I will still not be able to sleep because I have to be working on this as a problem. This requires, if I'm not working on it, I won't be able to focus on anything else. Nothing else matters. And so this job came up at the same time, and I said, listen, you can hire me or not hire me, but you're going to see me in this space because this is something that I don't want to do. This is something I need to do. And that's how I ended up here.
Yeah. So you're driven by the passion of the cause.
Yeah, passion of the cause and providing a hopeful future for my children.
Excellent. So clearly, we have seen you in this space. You're championing a whole host of initiatives throughout the region, and you've been participating in a number of forums here at COP27.
Yeah.
How do you find the energy? What do you do to keep you motivated and get this amount of energy to put against the cause?
I am fueled by the love of my family. I have amazing parents, a wonderful husband, and two of the most incredible girls that anybody could wish to have. And so, I always say about both of my girls, even if they weren't my girls, I'd love them. They're such just spectacular human beings. So, and then on behalf of the young people that I've met in this effort, we have such amazing young people who are doing incredible things, and all they need is support and hope and to know that the leaders around the region, the old hats like me, are doing something to support them so that when we hand them the baton, there is something left, there's a race left to run, and it's not like we're just sitting around waiting for the end.
Yeah. Well, excellent. We're happy to have you as part of this movement. Tell me, I heard something that I didn't know before in researching you a little bit. I heard you're an actual marathon runner.
I am.
How did you get into that, and what motivated you to do that?
So I'm a 4-time marathon runner. I've done Panama, Marine Corps, the original marathon from Marathon to Athens, and Georgia Marathon. And I got into marathoning only because I could not at the time run a mile. And I always felt like there shouldn't be anything that I can't do. Like, I've been given so much opportunity in my life, there shouldn't be anything that I can't do. So I was like, okay, I can't run a mile. I need to be able to run a mile. So I joined a running club and started running. And it was a little bit of run, walk, and then got up to a mile. And then they were like, well, since you're running, you should train for a marathon. I was like, that's insane. And then they said, listen, if you can run a mile, you can string enough miles together to do 26.2. And that's how it happened.
Wow. Well, you inspire me. All right. Let me ask you a little bit. We're going to dig in a little bit into sort of the framework coming into COP and a lot of the discussion about loss and damage.
Yeah.
And you've been sort of exposed to this conversation on various levels. Um, Tell us a little bit. What is this loss and damage that everybody's talking about? What is it? And what was the vision coming into COP for small island developing states?
Okay, so when we talk about loss and damage, it really is about the carbon in the atmosphere that created wealth for the global north is causing the intensification of these storms and the intensification of the climate crisis that we're feeling on the front lines. So the droughts, the floods, the hurricanes, intensifying, all of these things, the changes in crop cycles, the increased food insecurity, all of these things are being intensified and made worse by the carbon in the atmosphere. And so what happens is Dominica, after Hurricane Maria, lost the equivalent of 226% of their GDP. You don't bounce back from that in a year. You don't bounce back from that really in a decade, despite amazing work that they are doing to protect themselves. And at some point, the people responsible, the people whose wealth was created by this carbon in the atmosphere, need to be held responsible and participate in helping to make nations whole for the damage that they're experiencing. We cannot continue to borrow based on wealth we didn't generate from this carbon that is causing this damage to us. So it is about climate justice. It is about equitable distribution of the responsibility of this carbon in the atmosphere. And it's an acknowledgement that climate mitigation or reducing the carbon has to happen. And in the interim, while we experience climate change that's already happening, someone needs to be held accountable for making smaller nations, the global south, whole for the changes and the costs that we are already incurring.
Yeah, as you described that, it occurs to me that on a personal level, if you were investing in a house, upgrading your home, buying furniture, and every couple years, someone comes through and run a bulldozer through your house.
Yeah,
You have to rebuild it.
yeah,
At some point, you can't get it insured.
yeah,
And you've lost the opportunity to use your hard-earned equity, sweat, and investments
yeah,
to build. And you talked about when your kids got to college,
Yeah.
what your goals were and how you wanted to have a better life for them.
yeah,
So I guess it's a similar concept in a way.
yeah.
One on a
Oh,
personal level and one is on a
absolutely.
national level.
Definitely. And think about this. The person with the bulldozer that's running through your house, their house is 10 times bigger than yours. And somehow they're not being held responsible for the damage that they're causing. And each time that they run this bulldozer through your house, they're not thinking about, okay, well, how do I stop doing that? They're just like, well, there are no consequences to running this bulldozer through. It's shorter for me, it saves me time, so I'll just keep doing it. And so there has to be some kind of acknowledgement that the way that things are need a massive transformation. And it's not about pointing fingers. I really feel like, the Caribbean is holding its own with attempting to adapt and attempting to find innovative ways to fund the transformation. It isn't about us just saying, well, it's just your fault and we sit and wait. No, there is activity from Suriname, Guyana, Trinidad, Barbados, Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, all the way up Dominica. I mean, magnificent efforts taking place. And so we're just asking to be met part way in the work that's already taking place.
Yeah, well, you sort of took us to a place where I'll lean into a little bit, because you're talking about the challenges. No one sort of likes to hear about all the bad news, but you've raised some really positive things that the Caribbean, despite the circumstances, despite the losses, are trying to champion ways of getting out of this situation, this vicious cycle.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about some of the activities that are happening And I'll tie it in a little bit to finance, because at the end of the day, loss and damage is about finance. And finance is what's needed to help us become more resilient and drive the transition. Tell us a little bit about some of the innovative finance um, sort of pathways that you're seeing happen within the region.
Sure. In terms of innovative finance, Bahamas just launched a blue carbon exchange. And what they're seeking to do is to use their extensive seagrass, and they have more seagrass than anybody else in the world. And they're seeking to monetize that, because the more seagrass we have, the more carbon sequestration we have. So we're providing solutions, right? And by creating this global exchange for blue carbon, we have the ability to own that, that ability to generate funding from blue carbon. So that's a solution that's on the front lines coming from the global south. The Caribbean Development Bank has launched the Recovery Duration Adjuster, and that is helping countries to get around the fact that if you are relatively wealthy, it does not take into consideration your vulnerability. So that, you know, what happened when Hurricane Ian hit Florida and what happened when Hurricane Dorian hit Bahamas is two different things in terms of ability to bounce back. And so it's looking at how do we factor in the duration of time that it takes to recover into the access to concessionary finance. And that is a model not just for the global south, but for everybody, because everybody has a different sort of ability to bounce back. And if we look at it through that lens, you factor in vulnerability in the ability to access finance. I mean, we're seeing things like Barbados's Roof to Reef program. And Barbados is an absolute pioneer in solar water heating across the world. I mean, they have figured out how to do that. Likewise, Jamaica has figured out how, through policy, to open up their renewable energy market. They have floating solar, they have wind, they have solar, and so they are actively taking responsibility for making changes. They met their NDC and then increased it. You know, and we're seeing so much happening. Guyana, that has a wealth of oil resources, are still laser focused on renewables. And I mean, that used to be the thing that kept me up at night, because I'm like, there's no way they're gonna like focus on renewables with all of this oil. But they are staying the course, and they are understanding that their energy market needs to be future-proof. And then we're also seeing a collaboration between Dominica and their massive geothermal resources, collaborating with Trinidad and creating the opportunity for a regional exchange of to create green hydrogen, a regional exchange of renewables. So we are coming up with innovations, we are coming up with solutions, we are using finance to in our best interest. We're working with people like the Intrinsic Value Exchange that's doing valuing of ecosystem services, and how do we create a marketplace for that. So there's so many things happening.
One of the things that I want to make sure we cover is there's been a lot of work done on, you talked about some of the vulnerability indices that were being created, and tell me a little bit about some of the work done around transparency and the measurements that are used to score some of the different countries.
Sure. So from a transparency standpoint, what we're doing is we're building out a climate smart map, which identifies where is the region and where are we against our own objectives, which is really helpful to help people understand, okay, what are the gaps that need to be filled, and how can the private sector participate in getting those gaps filled. And that's a really key component, because the private sector is engaged and wants to participate. They just need to understand what are the opportunities to get involved. On a regional level, working with the Islands Resiliency Action Challenge, we've developed a resilience scorecard. Dominica is one of the pilots that we're doing, and they're sort of our living lab on how do we measure resilience and by their own objectives, and then how do we identify the cost gaps between building additional resilience so that funders, philanthropists, etc. know where are the opportunities to get involved, either at a country level or on a regional level, looking at the various countries that we're measuring for resilience. And then on the global level, it is about implementing the enhanced transparency framework so that we can, this needs to be the thing that we watch like Olympics, like who is winning, because whoever's winning, it's all of us winning. And whoever's losing, we're all going to lose together. So we have to be able to focus on this. Who's doing the best work?
Yeah.
Who's making the most progress? What areas? What we see in the region is that there are centers of excellence in each island about a particular thing. And it's the same globally. So if we can tap into those centers of excellence, how did you figure that out? And let's figure out how we replicate that as much as possible for people having that same problem. And move from place to place, looking at what are the opportunities to close the gaps that we have, especially as, you know, I'm looking through the lens of working with the private sector, because that's how our collaboration model works. But how do we allow private sector to get engaged in helping to solve some of these problems?
Yeah, well, it's I guess you have more than 30 different countries, independent nations that are pursuing this individually.
Yeah.
Some are doing great job in certain areas. Why not use that same roadmap rather than starting from scratch?
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense. I guess I wouldn't survive much longer if I didn't dig in a little bit into energy, because
Yes, of course.
that's my passion, of course.
Ours as well.
And I want to talk about a little bit about what are some of the things sort of you're seeing on the landscape when it comes to energy, what's happening on the ground, and then also sort of the broader needs for the region and some of the solutions that you're seeing in that space.
I think for us, and that's why, you know, we're so delighted to work very closely with RMI. It's so important, the project preparation. So, you know, we hear all the time that there's no money, there's not enough money in climate action. And that is true and untrue at the same time. There isn't enough grant funding available to help prepare projects. And that is the sort of magic that RMI brings to the region. You prepare projects to make them commercially viable, so then allow the private sector to get involved. And that's what we need to see happening. We see your collaboration with the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, CCRE, and that's really important in this preparing of the projects. And that's where philanthropic money can be so catalytic in helping us in this energy transition, because energy transition for us makes sense. We are in an area of extremely high cost per kilowatt hour, so it makes sense, but it's a huge upfront cost. So how can we get the private sector to take that on, prepare the projects, get them commercially ready? And so that's what we want to see. We're seeing countries figuring out how to get their energy mix right. You know, like Aruba, Curacao, and Bonaire are using all sorts of things. They're using wind, they're using waste energy, they're using solar, they're using, you know, hydro. So it's great to see everybody figuring out what their ideal energy mix is. But we're also seeing the opportunity to collaborate on a regional level. Like there's a great opportunity for offshore wind, for example, in the Southern Caribbean. But how do we tap into that and at the scale required to get us at the right cost per kilowatt hour? Well, it means that it has to be applicable to more than one country. So, and it has to be at a scale that applies to more than one country. So that's what we're seeing. It's Dominica being not the only geothermal, but the first. And if we can create a captive market for geothermal across the region so that everybody can explore to the complete full potential of their geothermal, we could be a massive player in green hydrogen and be a net export market. It can be bigger than tourism for the Caribbean. And that's the goal that we need to work towards. How do we collaborate towards making those kinds of things, bringing those kinds of things to fruition?
Well, I mean, what I like is that we don't only have challenges that you're expressing here today. There are solutions to these challenges. And this reminded me that just recently, you were quoted in a CNN article, all right, that you already spoke about a number of the elements that were quoted in there. But one of the things that I'd sort of like to highlight is the fact that you see a lot of parallels in the challenges that creates opportunities for the region for us to pivot beyond fixing our local problem, but build something that can be an exporter of energy or something that grows the region as a whole.
Absolutely. This climate change will create trillions of dollars of opportunities in this transition. And we cannot be just the customers of this transition. We have to be the opportunity owners. We have to participate meaningfully in this economic opportunity. If we don't future-proof our economies, then we have lost a magnificent opportunity. This is a whole new ball game. And you know, the global north cannot be the sole beneficiary of the problem that they've caused. We have to be the ones being allowed to be at the table, to exercise transactions, and to participate in that new economy. And we need young people, getting trained, getting involved. I know you guys do a lot of really great work with making sure that we're getting young people into renewables, and we need to see more of that. It's really important.
Yeah, well, you've touched on so many things. We could spend hours having this discussion, but I really enjoyed the discussion because it took us a lot of places, touched on a lot of topics that we could explore in the future.
Yeah.
But I want to say that for sure, I feel that your daughter is in better hands with your energy and passion around climate change. And I really thank you for taking the time. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing to anyone out there that you think you can influence?
Absolutely. There is a role for everyone in this transition. What we're talking about is not like an incremental change. We're talking about a complete change in how we do things. And it's not because we want to avoid disaster, which we do. It is more about the vision for the future that is so inclusive and circular and healthy for all of us. And so there is something that everyone can do to get involved. Don't sit on the sidelines. This is not one of those things that you need to watch. This is one of those things that you need to act on. You need to get involved. You need to read, you need to get educated, you need to figure out what is your role in this transition. What is your business's role? What are business opportunities for you? How can you advocate? How can you speak out? How can you influence others in the developing countries that need to take action? But there is a role for everybody, and get excited about that. The future that we have, the future that is possible for us is so magnificent. Don't worry about running from disaster. Think about the opportunity for this whole new paradigm of fixing a lot of the things that have gone wrong. And a lot of that has to do with having more women in leadership. So definitely to get more women pursuing leadership, more gender equity, more equity in general. And I think that makes such a huge difference. Get involved.
Yeah. Excellent. Racquel, I really appreciate you taking the time. You touched on yet another point that I'd like to dig in further, but we only have so much time. Thank you so much, and always a pleasure being next to you, in the same room.
Absolutely.